Hi everyone, Jay here from Jade Productions, back with another video. We are looking at a beginner's guide to Age of Sigmar for the Seraphon. So the Seraphon, for those of you who haven't watched any videos where I've sort of prattled on about them a bit, are basically the faction I have played for since the end of 8th edition. I started them for 8th edition, then the end times hit, so I rebased them all for Sigmar, and I've been playing them for Sigmar. They're the army that I've played most of my Sigmar with, so they are in my ballpark. I've now had some time to digest and play and test and talk to other Seraphon players and other people about the Seraphon book and a lot of stuff to really give you good knowledge for if you want to get into Seraphon, where are some good things to begin, where are some pitfalls to sort of avoid, places where I went wrong. So, little thing about the Seraphon is they are lizard people with a Aztec Mesopotamian sort of theme that at the end of Warhammer Fantasy in the old world got on their pyramid ships and literally flew into space to escape the world exploding and traveled across space and time to the mortal realms to finish the fight, reactivating their spawning pools, regenerating their race, which is divided into several castes of several different lizard folk, igniting their hatcheries and breeding their massive dinosaurs, and letting them loose inside the massive colony ships that have massive forests inside of them, before beaming down to the surface of the planets of the mortal realms, to absolutely cobs-wallop chaos. So, now, the first thing you need to know about this army is that if you played Warhammer Fantasy, and you are familiar with the Seraphon from Warhammer Fantasy in any sort of way, completely throw that out the window. Seraphon play completely different now. And if you're familiar with Age of Sigmar when it first came out, and the Seraphon's performance when they were first released all those years ago, as one of the first battle tomes, a battle tome with no rules in it, and then they subsisted on ever-changing General's Handbooks, they basically started off in a really good place, and the only thing that was keeping them in the meta was their ability to summon, and as that got nerfed, they went downhill, and then eventually they were just completely reworked in this book. Now, a thing about this is they have a stigma attached to them, but that's because previously in Age of Sigmar 1.0 there was only one way to play the Seraphon, and if you didn't play it that way, you did not win. I experienced this firsthand on multiple occasions. But suffice to say, they're now a really interesting army, and now the interesting thing about this Seraphon army is that there are now two ways to play them, as they're divided succinctly into two separate armies, which, sure, while the book doesn't give you a lot of the really cool tidbits and features that a lot of other books do, like mount traits, a decent selection of warlord traits, decent relics, it does have some potential in its units, and it's very heavily reliant on its synergies. So when it comes to collecting these guys, the first thing you're going to need is a Slann or Croak, and I cannot stress that enough. That is the first thing you're going to need if you're going to want these guys. Now, as we go through it and sort of digest these guys, we'll go in a bit more about good ways to collect them, but essentially a good place to start with this army is to get yourself Slann, 30 Sauraus warriors. Get yourself a 2 box of skinks, for 40 of them in total, and this will provide your very core. Now you can build a lot of the very basic battalions, or you can build your stuff in a very simple brick, and it gives you plenty of stuff to be able to do it. And then from there, we can go and expand on out. The Seraphon have 2 start collecting boxes. So in terms of their reusability and how good they are, the Seraphon box with the Carnosaur, it comes with Sauraus warriors, and it comes with Sauraus riders, Sauraus cavalry. This is a good box. You can buy it multiple times. The Carnosaur kit builds 3 different units, 4 different units, all of which are very good for their different perspective, how you want to go. So use plenty of reusability out of that. It gives you plenty of guys. And now the Sauraus Cavalry, while they're not particularly my favorite unit, they are a good unit that can put out a lot of attacks, and they're very useful. I particularly don't like them from a modeling standpoint. That's all. but they're still a very fantastic unit, and that gives you a very good thing to latch onto. Then there's a new Skink Get Started box, which came along at the same time that this book came out, and I can tell you that this book, with Age of Sigmar 2.0 Seraphon, loves skinks. Skinks are definitely the superior race. Sorry, all you people out there who actually, love Sauraus. But it's skink. Skink or go home is the moral of this book, as we'll get into. Your Sauraus are just sort of there. But that will give you a good start as well. That one is probably less value in terms of the number of times you can rebuy it. You probably only need one Bastillodon. If you're going for 2 Bastillodons, that's fine. The Skink Priest is a good, Skink Star Priest is a good little wizard character to have. Pretty handy. Nice and cheap HQ. The Skinks are always handy, and the Pteranodons are also very good. And there's very good, easy ways to get your hands on that. I definitely suggest Stegodons are something that you then go and buy individually. You probably, in the end, you'll probably want about 3 of them. And if you can, you'll probably want to try and avoid gluing them so that you can basically convert them basically in and out to the different formats you want. I also recommend with Bastillodons, while the laser is a very good build, you don't actually have to glue it on. You can build both the Arc of Sotek and the laser arc. You can build them both. You just need to not glue it, and you need to be a little... You don't need to put on all the snakes and all the flourishes that go into both, and then you'll be able to just pick them up, put them on top, whichever one. I do that. I don't have it magnetized or glued, so I can just pick up and swap the different parts if I feel like feeling an Arc of Sotek Bastillodon, or if I feel like feeling a laser Bastillodon. The Stegodons are a little harder, but essentially there's 3 different builds for them, just from the one kit, and then one of those has 2 weapon options. They're a little bit of a nightmare, so you'll probably want 3 of them. They are one of your cheapest monsters, though. In terms of Seraphon, in terms of Sauraus warriors, you don't want to overload on them. Your real strength comes from your really auxiliary units. Pterodons, Skinks, Sauraus Cav, all your different dinosaurs as their heroes as they are. And then all your salamanders, your war beasts, all those kinds of things are where your power in this army comes from. So, now let's take a moment to dive into the army proper, and let's talk about the things we need to know about them from a gameplay point of view. Seraphon have a lot of units, as we talked about, and they're fairly well priced as far as things go. They're not always on the great end, but you will have to buy a lot of stuff, and you'll probably never get to the field at all. Magnetization and being creative with conversions is going to be your best friend for some of those older units that are very good, but a little hard to get your hands on. You will need a Slann. That's just very simple. You need a Slann to run this army. You can do it without it, but get yourself Croak, get yourself a Slann. You will always want one after you see how well they do and what they do. So, the Seraphon, in terms of what they do, in terms of the gameplay, well, the first things first is that they are divided into 2 armies. They have the Starborn and the Coalesce. The Starborn are definitely the more finesse version and the much harder version to play. If you're familiar with Seraphon in Age of Sigmar 1.0 and how they used to play with, be very tactical in terms of playing the objectives, drop down here, summon this, cast spells there, generate summoning points, try and recycle your units, which are well and truly overcosted in terms of their summoning cost. Very simply, that's how they play. They're really not a lot of different, but we'll go into them a bit. And then the Coalesced are what you're familiar with if you're familiar with Warhammer Fantasy. They're a little closer to how the Seraphon used to play. Being vicious, lots of attacks, taking a beating, a pounding, ignoring morale, that kind of thing. So, now, you have to pick. You have to pick. That is an important distinction, that unlike most other armies that are separated like this, the Seraphon do have to pick. You must dedicate yourself. You must be Coalesced, or you must be Starborn. If you're just getting started with Seraphon, I definitely recommend you play your first few games as Coalesced. They are, in my opinion, the better version, and they are the more forgiving version of Seraphon. The Starborn are a little bit more advanced and something that require unlike the Coalesce, which are very forgiving in the armies you can build into them, the Starborn are not forgiving. You must build into those lists. You require very specific models to make them work, and you require them in very specific amounts. You also, in terms of what you do, you have really good magic in this army. So you have the Sages, you have the Sacred Artisans, which these are things that basically at the start of your hero phase, you can pick one of the following to be ascendant until your next hero phase. It's similar to old style constellations from Seraphon when they were first in the General's Handbook. There's 3 of them. In the combat phase, you pick one of your friendly Seraphon heroes. Until the end phase, you get to add 1 to its attacks. Don't discount it, especially in Coalesced. The Hunter's Steed adds 1 to your run and charge rolls for all friendly Seraphon units. A very good one, a very good global buff to have from the start. In my opinion, the winner of the lot is the Sage's Staff, where you pick a hero, 1 friendly Seraphon wizard, so a Slann, and then you get +1 to your casting, because your spells are important, and you'll see why in a little bit. Also, a really good thing, as I said, spells, magic, Slann. Slann, as one of your abilities, have the ability to swap out spells every round. So, at the beginning of your hero phase, you can pick 1 friendly Slann, replace a spell they know from the Lore of Celestial Dominion with a new spell from the table. You can choose or roll the new spell, rolling again if you generate a spell the Slann already had. So, already right there, we can see that there's a huge emphasis on magic in the base trait. Now, these are ones that you always get regardless of with your Starborn or Coalesced. On top of that, now you get the Coalesced and the Starborn traits. This is very important. You always get the Ways of the Seraphon, and then you also get the Coalesced and the Starborn stuff, depending on your pick. So there's a lot of army special rules. They're small minor buffs, but it's important to keep them in mind. So for Coalesced, as the kind of more aggressive one, they have access to 2 sub-factions. They're cold-blooded in that they ignore bravery modifiers. So all of them, positive and negative, which means you are stuck at the bravery you are stuck at. You do not get benefits for larger detachments. There's no every 10 models gives you an extra bravery. There's no death armies giving you -1 to braveries. No one can screw with your bravery. This is both good and bad because it means you can't screw with it, which means you're going to need command points for really large squads that die en masse, like Sauraus warriors if you take a pounding and lose a lot of them out of a big unit. Because of this, Coalesced really like small-sized units. Lots of units, small size. And then saving those command points for the ones that you do need to field bigger ones of. Predatory fighters, you add 1 to the attacks characteristic of Jaws weapons used by the Coalesced units. Now, this is important. Pay attention, because a Jaw weapon is anything with Jaws in its name. And just about anything that's not a skink has a Jaw weapon. So, this can mean you get a lot of extra attacks. Now, typically, these jaw attacks on regular guys don't hit very well, and they don't wound very well. 5s and 4s. But you have ways of buffing that, and to be honest, so long as you're throwing extra attacks out, you're getting more value. This is the thing. Without Coalesced, the Seraphon are actually kind of, their units are really bad without their synergies and buffs working together. Just in general. You also have your Primeval Domain. So pretty much for a Coalesced army, if terrain is in your territory, you basically only benefit... It's an interesting one that doesn't come up very often, but essentially, a terrain feature wholly or partially within a territory of the Coalesced army, then any damned, arcane, inspiring, mystical sceneries for that terrain feature only apply to Coalesced units. So, terrain in your deployment territory, your territory which is defined on your battle plan for your game, for your mission, the good effects only affect you, and the bad effects only affect your opponents. So, nature itself sort of says, yeah, we like the lizards, screw everything else. And then the most important one is Scaly Skin. Subtract 1 from the damage inflicted by each successful attack that targets a Coalesce unit to a minimum of 1. So this is what makes the Coalesce combined with the Jaw attacks particularly good, and why they're a bit more forgiving, because they let you get more out of your rather mediocre units. This is very important. It doesn't affect mortal wounds, but in essence, when you get hit with things with that do 2 damage, you're only going to take 1 damage. So it certainly helps to keep you alive in the long run against high damage attacks. And then the Predatory Fighters with the extra Jaw attacks lets you, the two combined basically allow you to live long enough to maybe get to fight back and deal some damage. Now, the Starborn are a lot more complicated. Essentially, all your bravery becomes 10 right off the bat, so you're much more brave, and then it can be modified so that you can get that much higher, so bravery becomes a non-concern for you, so feel free to field larger units. You'll still need command points in that for, really disastrous turns, because now you don't have the durability that the Coalesce come with, and you don't have the attack power that the Coalesce come with. But instead, there's a really complicated thing on how you get Celestial Conjuration points, which you can use for summoning. So this is one of those armies that does have access to summoning. And essentially, you're always going to get D3 of them. If you have a Slann or a Starseer, then you're going to get D3 more if you have an Astrolith Bearer. In addition, in your hero phase, before attempting to cast the first spell from each friendly Slann or Oracle, you can say that it will carry out a conjuration and you'll get D3 more. So, but you reduce the number of spells that you can cast. So essentially, you're giving up 1 spell, and you can only give up 1 spell, and you can only do this once, for a potential of 9d3 summoning points each turn. This is important because that can really cap you. Now, if you have 6 or more, you then get to summon. And 6 is the minimum you need to summon. And when you summon them, they've got to be wholly within 12 inches of a Slann, an Oracle, or your Astrolith Bearer, and 9 away from anything else. Your next most powerful thing that's really important with this army is that the Lords of Space and Time lets you get around some movement shenanigans. So, where the Coalesced are a bit more aggressive and able to endure and actually dish out some damage and make the use out of their units, the Starborn play the objective game. With Lords of Space and Time, you can pick up a Seraphon unit, teleport it to the other side of the field. You can do this pretty much once per each of your movement phases. So you can pick up a unit, shunt it over there, get that objective. Very good, alright? So it is really good for taking objectives, playing that game, getting the movement shenanigans, getting behind something, flanks, distracting, blocking. Really important. That's why it's certainly the harder one. And then on top of that, you have, you're limited to 2 different kinds of sub-factions. In terms of the summoning table, it's kind of not very forgiving. You're able to achieve yourself a total of 9 per turn if you roll maximum amount. And suffice to say, your lowest one is 6, which gets you 10 skinks. Your second level is 10, which can get you anything from 3 Pterodon Riders, 10 Sauraus Warriors, which are totally not worth 10 Celestial Conjuration points, Old Bloods, 5 Sauraus Guard, a couple of different characters. Salamander Hunting Pack is very good. Ripidactyl Riders, very good for 10. Chameleon Skinks, not so much. Razordon, very good. And then your next bracket is at 15 points. You can bring in stuff like some better characters. Some more utility characters rather than some really fighter characters, with the exception of the Sunblood, and another Astrolith Bearer, and then some Croxagors, some 3 Croxagors at 15. And then at 20 to 30 is when you start to bring in your really good stuff. So you really have to commit to this, and it's just kind of not worth it. But there are a bunch of guides online for good things to summon. and when you have a good ways to summon. Essentially, good things to summon, breaking down here. Skinks are good. Pterodon Riders are good. The 5 Sauraus Knights are not so good, but they're okay. The 5 Sauraus Guard are not as good as they used to be. The Eternity Warden is good. The Ripidactyl Riders are a good thing to summon. Razordons are a good thing to summon. Salamanders are a good thing to summon. The Sunblood is a good thing to summon. The Croxagores are a good thing to summon. The Bastiladon, Stegodon are good things to summon. The Old Blood on Carnosaur and the Stegodon with Skink Chief are good things to summon. It's a lot to take in terms of the summoning. I definitely recommend if you're beginning with Age of Sigmar and you're beginning with Seraphon, stick to the Coalesce for the first little bit and play some smaller games with Starborn, which is admittedly where the Starborn are very weak. They actually don't do very well in small games. But that is something to build towards with Starborn. They are certainly a much more complicated beast, especially once you throw their sub-factions in. But you basically now have a choice between playing traditional Seraphon, or traditional Lizardmen, as they used to be called, with a bit more, let's be our ordered cohorts, advance with our lizards, tear things up, absolutely eviscerate the enemy while taking a punishment back, versus, yeah, let's be space dinosaurs teleporting around the place, stealing your gold, essentially. So, I'll briefly go into command traits here. Now, when it comes to things, and when you consider your army and you're putting it together with the Seraphon, you have 3 generic command traits for the 3 different kinds of heroes that exist in your army. So there's 3 for the Slann, 3 for the Sauraus, 3 for the Skink. So, all the Sauraus ones are pretty trash. You never want a Sauraus as your general. If you have a Sauraus as your general, Mighty War Leader, that basically, if your general is alive and at the start of your hero phase you roll a d6 on a 4+, you get an extra command point. Only good one in there. The rest are trash, otherwise never make your guy never make a Sauraus a general. Sauraus really got shafted in this book, I'm sorry. I'm really salty about this book even now, like a lot of months later. So, the Slann ones are okay. The reroll, they all serve to basically increase the power of your spells. Unfortunately, the one you want knowing these guys is not so great. Great Rememberer is a good one. Again, it gets you an extra command point. Lets your generic Slann basically pretend he's Lord Croak, rolling 3d6, and for each 4+, he's going to get a command point. This is a command point hungry army, so anything like that is very good. But you also have Vast Intellect, not a good one since you can trade out your spells. You don't need to know an extra spell. The Arcane Might, the rerolling ones for casting, again, more reliability. They're better than the Sauraus ones, which are so bad I'm not even going to talk about them. Just don't even do it. They're all traps. The Skink ones. Skinks are what you want to be your general if it's not a Slann. And to be honest, the Slann doesn't need to be your general. You need to bring a Slann, but the Skink is often better as your general. There's a lot more synergies and combos you can build with a Skink to make really effective characters. Skinks are the real power behind this book. Learn to love them as a result. Add 1 to casting rolls for this general if they are a wizard. If they are not a wizard, then once per battle round, they can use the Herald of the Old One's command ability from the Skink Priest War Scroll without a command point being spent. That is a very good command ability for a Skink. Always put it on a Skink that doesn't cast. So, pretty much put that on a Skink Priest on Stegodon, put that on a Skink Priest on Ripidactyl for really mobile versions of it. It's a really good command ability that we'll get into in time. That's just, you want it, and it really is good. Especially for Skinks. Skinks support Skinks, which lets you have skink-on-skink synergies. Most of how this army works is that your Skinks will basically support Skinks, and they'll do the real damage as they get all their synergies off, while any Sauraus you bring sort of just hold objectives and soak damage. The real work is done by Skinks and Dinos, and a Slann supporting it all. Nimble, add 1 to the general's movement characteristic and add 1 to the save rolls for attacks that target them. Fantastic, because you have skinks you can put on big dinosaurs. Very good. Now, those things admittedly vary from, yeah, okay, the Trog's alright, to the skink chief on Stegodon. Yes, we want that, please. And then, of course, there's the Cunning. The Cunning is the worst one. It's these two, the first two, Nimble and Master of Star Rituals, that are the fantastic ones. So everyone's pretty good in overall. It's really disappointing overall when you see this, in fact, compared to other armies, considering I can look over my Caradon book, and each of the 4 different characters each have 6 command general traits that they can take, and yet the Seraphon have been shafted with only 3 each. And most of them are mediocre except for the skink. So, bear that in mind. Skinks are where you go. Your artifacts of power. Once again, I'm not going to go into the artifacts of power really in depth. They can be summarized as the Slann ones. Never give them to your Slann. There is particularly only... where is it? Light of Dracothian is a really good one. Wow. That's a bit of a stretch. Itix Grubs are an okay one. The Itix Grubs is probably... Itixi Grubs is probably the best Slann artifact of power you can give it. It lets your Slann heal if somehow they've been wounded by someone trying to snipe them. Getting them 1 wound back a hero phase. In addition, you get to re-roll casting rolls and dispel rolls of 1 and unbinding rolls of 1. That's pretty much the best one. Throne of the Lost Gods is a close second, but I'd rather heal than get 1 extra wound. The Sauraus ones, they are bad. Just like the Sauraus command traits, they are bad. You will only take these if you have a free relic available. So, if you're taking them and you have a free relic artifact available, the one you're going to take is the Blade of Realities. You get to improve your rend, which is not something you have a huge amount of, and you get to add 1 to the damage against heroes, putting this on one of the Sauraus' weapons. Sure, you can turn them into a bit of a blender and a duelist. That's definitely not something you pick as your first option. The other ones are very, very meh. So, the skinks are once again the winners here. The skinks have 3 very good relics. These will probably be your first picks after any mandatory relics you might have to take. These are the things you'll want. The Incandescent Rites, first time the bearer is slain, before removing them from the field, on 1 to 3, nothing. On a 4 to 6, they're not slain, and they're fully healed. And all the remaining wounds that you're yet to allocate to it from the attack that would have killed it, are negated. So, you have a resurrecting skink. Very good, your skinks are very important, and you have some powerful skink leaders available. Cloak of Feathers, very, very, very good. Subtract 1 from hit rolls that basically target the bearer. In addition, you add 4 inches to the move characteristic of the bearer, and they can fly. Cool, flying stegodons that can jink through the air. Now, that might be your first thought, but there's some other places that this can go with. This one's a very good one for ensuring that your skink leaders survive. And there's some things you can do to actually stack it to make some skinks like -3 to hit. So, very good on that. But most of these pair very well with skinks on a mount, rather than, regular skinks by themselves on foot. Because they're just a little bit too squishy to be doing anything fancy with. But even then, Cloak of Feathers is a good one in general. The Stegodon Helm. So the Sacred Stegodon Realm gets you add 1 to your save characteristics of your bearer. Awesome. Particularly on mounted ones, not so much on the non-mounted ones. In addition, add 1 to the damage characteristic of melee weapons used by the bearer if they made a charge move this turn. Your skink, you don't care about that. But this doesn't say it doesn't apply to a mount. So keep that in mind. Alright. we're going to fly through this really quick as we go through the spells. Here, your spells are divided into the Law of Celestial Domination and the Law of Celestial Manipulation. So, essentially, you have a Law of the Slann and a Law of the Skinks. The Law of the Slann is the better one, but Slann are expensive. Good news is, even though you can only know one of them, you can swap them out. Bad news is, they're all various levels of, that's an auto take, to I might swap between these two, to really meh. The Law of Celestial Manipulation is the one where, some of these are okay, some of these are good, yeah, the rest are kind of meh. In terms of spells from the Law of the Slann, so Celestial Domination, that are worth taking. Celestial Apotheosis is something worth taking later in the game. It's not something that you should start the game with. Stellar Tempest has an excellent range. It's something I would always start the game knowing. Stellar Tempest being a nice little it's just peppering mortal wounds, and Slanns are great mortal wound batteries. It's okay, right? It's on a 5+. Its niche thing is that it's 24 inches for dishing out for its range. So that's good. Swapping between that one and then maybe Celestial Apotheosis later, which unfortunately is only good for healing monsters, but at least is, cheap. Easy to cast. The Mystical Unforging is a decent one if you manage to get someone in range. Other than that, the rest are okay. The only one worth mentioning afterwards is Celestial Equilibrium. Now, Celestial Equilibrium is one where, rather than everyone supporting your Slann and buffing your Slann's casting through the roof with a potential +3 re-rolling ones on just about every cast, this one lets him basically add 1 to the casting and dispelling for friendly wizards other than him. So you can't get it up to +4 on him, but you can increase the reliability of other wizards around him. Pretty good. Multiple Slanns are very expensive, keep that in mind. But you have lots of little wizards that you'll be able to use. The Law of Celestial Manipulation for the Skinks. So, pretty much, the Law of the Celestial Harmony is okay. It's not the default pick I would go for. Hand of Glory is definitely the go-to one here. Followed by Fiery Convocation. Tide of Serpents if you really, don't care what you're having. Hand of Glory and Fiery Convocation, though, are the best ones. Fiery Convocation also being fairly high to cast. It's essentially, you cast it on a 7, you pick one enemy within 18 inches, until at the end of each phase of a turn, roll a dice on a 6, the unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. It's not particularly effective, but at least it gives them something to worry about. Hand of Glory is cheaper at casting value 6. You pick one friendly unit wholly within 18 inches of the caster, invisible to them. They get to re-roll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made by the unit. Saves you a command point. The other ones are very, very situational. Your Realm Shaper engine is a piece of terrain that your army has. I'm not really going to talk about this thing. It's kind of really bad in terms of its deployment rules. So with this thing, you actually have to put it down before you even know what side of the board you're going on. Before you even know what territory you have and where you're deploying. So you basically have to gamble on this thing. If you can get into it and use it, it's very good potentially. It does make you a bit of a target, since now someone can just attack it since it counts as a garrison. But at the same time, it can dish out some reliable mortal wounds if you can get guys into it, and can give some protection. For quite a lot of things, with things less than wounds characteristic of 20, you can actually garrison monsters in it, funnily enough. So, now we're going to go into the sub-factions. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. Essentially, the sub-factions There's 2 for each of the Starborn and the Coalesced, and how you build into them and how these guys are affecting what you're going to be building for your list as you get into Age of Sigmar. The point is with each one sort of is very much geared towards a different kind of list. The Dragothian's Tale is a very forgiving sub-faction in terms of what it does. It's very generic, very meh, it gives you some movement shenanigans. There's no real list requirements for it. There's nothing that is mandatory for it other than a Slann, which you already want. Overall, it's a really okayish one. And that's saying something because it's one of the worst. Fangs of Sotek is another Starborn one. This one really wants you to build skinks. So if you plan on going Fangs of Sotek, if you want to be really fast with the movement around, you want to blitz your opponent first turn, I recommend this one really wants you to be using skinks, skink heroes, chameleon skinks, Pterodon riders, skink artillery in the forms of Razordons. It wants you to be using the occasional Stegodon. It wants you to be using pretty much nothing but skink-only army with a Slann. This is what this one wants. It's pretty decent as far as it goes. Its main ability is one use only during the first battle round. But essentially, this one is all about playing the objectives game, skirmishing opponents, making the most of shooting, and all the skink abilities and synergies that you're going to see in a minute when we discuss the units themselves. The Coalesced have 2 other ones which are far more aggressive. Kotal's Claw and Thunder Lizard. Now, the good thing about these is that Thunder Lizard seems very geared towards monsters. That's very obvious from the outset when you read it. All of its stuff affects monsters. Monsters are very good in Thunder Lizard. It wants you to field an all-monster army. That said, Thunder Lizard probably gets my recommendation as the most general go-to sub-faction. Simply put, while it wants you to build a Monster Mash army for it, and you could build that into it, as Seraphon, you want to buy those dinosaurs. They look so cool. You want to buy them, you want to field them, but you also want to build a regular army. And even if you're fielding only a couple dinosaurs, this serves to enhance your monsters, which suffer in Age of Sigmar, generally. And by enhancing them, it enhances the majority of your army. It's the go-to one simply because, on top of that, it can support any kind of list build that involves using what makes your army special. The fact that you're dinosaur people riding dinosaurs. Kotal's Claw is the second one. It's far more Sauraus focused. It wants you to be bringing Sauraus, it wants you to be getting aggressive, it wants you to bring lots of Sauraus, piling on the synergies for Sauraus, and buffing them up to amounts that they can actually compete with other armies' units. Without Kotal's Claw, Sauraus are not particularly good. I'll say that flat out. That said, Kotal's Claw can make them good. So if you intend to play lots of Sauraus, definitely lean towards Kotal's Claw. If you want to play a traditional if you don't want to build towards a particular skew, you can go with Thunder Lizard or Kotal's Claw as the Coalesced just fine. If you also don't want to build to a skew and you want to play Starborn and you just want to field a particular list and you don't want to worry about buying lots of things and building into an army too heavily, Dragothian's Tale is what comes next. I'm not going to delve too deep into what these particularly do. Suffice to say, every one of them's got their ups and downs sides, except for Dragothian's Tale. It's so generic it hurts, with nothing really good about it. Just everything kind of meh. But Thunder Lizard, Kotal's Claw, and Fangs of Sotek are particularly good. Fangs of Sotek being very skink skewed. Now, talk very briefly about your battalions in Seraphon, because battalions can greatly influence what you do, and you kind of want them in this army because they are definitely important for you getting an extra relic, especially if you're locked into, for example, the Coalesced sub-factions if you choose to be Kotal's Claw, or, if you choose to lock into a sub-faction and you get stuck with that relic, well, you might want to consider just building one of these as cheaply as possible in order to get a second relic so that you can build some nice skink bosses. Or you might just take, and on top of that, in addition, free command point. Just saying. You need those. You really need those in this army. Now, basically, all the War Scrolls are repeated twice, and there's slight differences. There's Coalesced and the Starborn ones. They all require the same units, but their abilities differ. Suffice to say, the abilities that the Starhost ones give the Starborn units are the buffs that your Coalesced want, and the Coalesced ones kind of give abilities that your Starborn really want. Fortunately, they're really easy to build, so even though you're not going to get a lot out of these abilities, you're still going to get something, and you're not wasting too much of a points investment most of the time. I recommend, personally, the Sunclaw, with minimum units of Sauraus Warriors, and then Sauraus Old Blood or Sauraus Sunblood. The Old Blood doesn't specify that it has to be on foot, so you can put it on a Carnosaur and really make use of its actual ability. The Fire Lance is okay. The Sauraus Knights are really good. Not sure you want that many use of Sauraus Knights. You probably want them coalesced into one big unit. The Shadow Strike is a pretty decent one. I'm a particular fan of the Shadow Strike Temple Host. The Thunderquake is a little hard to build. It's probably the most expensive one money-wise to build, but it's decent enough with what it does. The Starborn ones, yeah, their abilities are less effective, and it's sort of the same sort of thing. Don't really focus on their abilities. None of them are super great. It's more about getting those extra bonuses that come with it. Now, let's break down into units. So, we're going to fly through this really quick, because you can check out these units online anytime, the Age of Sigmar app, but just to give you some brief impressions on how you can use these things. So, your Slann or Lord Croak. Now, these are your primary mage casters. You're going to have one of these at the center of every time you build an army, most of the time. Probably about 85% of the time you're going to have one of these. They're just ridiculously good. They have the ability to provide you those command points that you need. They have really reliable magic casting. They have some good spells. They work as magic snipers with Comet's Call, allowing you from get-go to really start picking off key units and really putting the damage on enemies from anywhere on the board. They have infinite range sniper rifles, so just keep them in the backfield protected by, just a little something. Maybe sit them on an objective and let them get their bonuses to cast. All in all, if you combine it with your base abilities from the Ways of the Seraphon and your constellations, their name changed, you can essentially use it to get them up to a +3 to cast, which is really reliable. Combine them with a particularly Lord Croak, who is basically just a more powerful version that has more of the same as a Slann. He's a Slann Star Master plus. Is he worth the additional points to go from 300 to 400? I would say Croak is definitely worth it. Particularly once you combine either of the Slann options. Just keep in mind Lord Croak is just a bit more killy and a bit more durable. Once you combine them with, what is it? It's here, the Astrolith Bearer. The Astrolith Bearer is a support character with an ugly-ass Finecast model. I highly recommend you find some spare Sauraus Warriors and convert them yourself out of a banner. Take some banner parts, take some Sauraus Guard parts if you can get them, take some Old Blood parts from the Sauraus Carnosaur kit if you have it, and some generic Sauraus warriors, get a 40mm base and slap one together yourself. Don't buy one. They look bad. But they're a kind of essential unit. If you're running a Slann and if you're running Starborn, you pretty much have to have one of these. So it's a good way to make sure you always have one available. They're particularly good in that they pretty much provide a 12-inch bubbles of wholly within 12-inch Seraphon units ignore wounds on a 6 and mortal wounds. Good general support banner that will increase your thing, and he's not a bad fighter, actually. And then his most important thing and why you want to pair him up with your Slann, but you can also pair him up with any wizard, is he gets to add 1 to the casting roll, so here's how we get the +3, if he's within 12 inches of them, and he gets to add 6 inches to the range of any spells. So, why that's important is not so much because Comet's Call. Comet's Call has infinite range, so that's your magic sniper spell. What's important when pairing that up with is it increases the range of your generic lore spells, and it lets your buffs go off further. For example, you might use, it extends the 24-inch range spell that we talked about earlier, where you get to rain Starfire down on guys from the Lore of Celestial Domination, or the one where you pick out a hero with a relic and potentially destroy the relic and deal damage to them, helps extend their range so that your Slann can be further away from the fighting. On Lord Croak specifically, it really pairs well with Celestial Deliverance, a spell that you can cast multiple times. So just keep on, just machine gun out mortal wounds. It's kind of actually really cheesy with him. But, pretty good. On top of that, these guys are decent in terms of their support buffs. They can increase the Seraphon's ability. They can let them fly and add 1 to their saving rolls against shooting attacks. They generate a certain number of command points, potentially, which you want. You want them as those command point batteries most of the time. We can really save the discussion on the Sauraus characters to boiling down to, you have the Sauraus Sunblood, who is essentially a good beatstick. He's fantastic as a beatstick, and he also serves as a good buff if you're running lots of Sauraus. If you're running big units of Sauraus, and you want them to do well, and you're committed to Kotal's Claw, and you're using the Old Blood to buff them, and you're using this guy to buff them, this guy definitely does it. He's pretty much a generic Old Blood, but his command ability lets you pick a enemy unit within 12 inches of him, and then you get to add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made by friendly Sauraus that attack that. Now, this is important because this is the only way that you get +1 to wound. This is the only thing that affects wounding in your army. Everything else is +1s to hit. That's why he is really important. Now, you don't need the +1 to wounds. You wound pretty decently, or you're throwing out enough attacks that the averages are going to do you well. It's the fact that he gives that is what makes him important as a character and worth your consideration, and what sets him apart from the rest of the Sauraus characters. The Old Bloods are various forms of, they're just your general duelists. They hit hard-ish. They're pretty good in attack. They have lots of weapon options. They got good saves, good wounds, very good at weapons, depending on your configuration. I definitely recommend the Warblade with 5 attacks, 3s and 3s, quantity of attacks being more important here. No rend, 1 damage. Or the Celestial Warblade, which is just as good with 4 attacks. The Great Blade is not super worth considering. I would definitely go with the Celestial Warblade. And then, of course, they have their Jaws, which are one of the better Jaws in the army. The Celestial Maul, which, funnily enough, is what the old Finecast has, is an okay weapon. I wish mine wasn't equipped with it, but you can potentially end up with a lot of Sauraus Whole Blood models, depending on how you collect this army. The Old Blood on Carnosaur is pretty much mono build, so you don't really have to worry about anything with him. He's just really, really good. This guy can tear units apart if you can get the strike in. He actually has a worse save than his guy on foot. He has 12 wounds. He's got a degrading stat line. What's important with him is his massive jaws are 3 attacks, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, -1, 5 damage. If you can put him in certain circumstances, you can get that up to rend 2. You can get that up to damage 6 at max profile. You can get him to wounding, to hitting on 2s once you combine enough buffs. And it's important to know that while he hits on 4s, he does have a rule, and this is all Carnosaurs have this rule, in that basically it is the pinned down. When you add 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made with massive jaws, if the target has a wounds characteristic of 7 or less. If the target. So keep that in mind. He's actually better at killing small stuff. But you don't want to send him into hordes unless you guaranteed that you can hit on 2+, that you have a lot of attacks. I definitely recommend. He's definitely a unit that benefits from being coalesced with 4 attacks on his jaws. His other weapons are very good. He has a bit of shooting. Don't rely on it. And like all the Sauraus Old Bloods, he has an ability that basically you can select a unit and they can only benefit from it once per phase. You get to pick a Sauraus unit wholly within 18 inches. You add 1 to the hit rolls. He can target himself, but yeah. You combine that and you hit the right things. You can have him hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s, -1, 5 damage. Potentially 4 attacks and coalesced. The Old Blood is a decent walloping choice. Just like most monsters, it's not particularly durable. So keep that in mind. You really have to know how to charge them in. Try to charge at the corners of enemy units where they can only pile in maybe a couple units. Try to pick on things with low reach, low model count units. He's very good when it comes to dealing with, for example, elite monstrous infantry. Things like the knights from the Flesh Eater Courts, the Crypt Horrors, and a whole bunch of other things. Particularly the Storm Fiends from Skaven come to mind. Things like that. The Eternity Warden is the next thing. He, again, same command ability, add 1 to the hit rolls, but his only exclusively affects Sauraus Guard. Other than that, he's just a decent sort of bodyguard unit that can take wounds for your Slann. Your Slann should not be taking wounds. If it is, you are doing it wrong. You need to keep that Slann far away from combat. You need to keep him particularly screened by something. Unit of, rather than a unit of, rather than an Eternity Warden, you're better off just going straight to the Sauraus Guard, to be honest. The Sauraus Guard themselves are your better Sauraus warriors. We'll come to them in a minute. The final type of Sauraus character is the Scar Veteran. Scar Veterans come on the Carnosaur, they come on a Velociraptor, and they come on foot. Actually, no, I think they deleted the on-foot option. Yes, they did. They deleted the on-foot option. Forgot about that. I really forgot about that. I missed that. Suffice to say, it's a cheaper Old Blood that instead, it's, once again, it can tell a Sauraus unit, and 6s to hit for that Sauraus unit count as 2 hits. In addition, the Scar Veteran on Carnosaur, which is the only really one you should be taking, has a bunch of different weapon options. The War Spear is the best because you get +1 damage on the charge. Same rules apply as the Old Blood. Otherwise, pretty much the same as in terms of use and tactics. This one's a bit more just disposable. A fun little tactic that still works and is still fun in Thunder Lizard is the all Carnosaur and Velociraptor army. If you just have a bunch of Scar Veterans and Old Bloods all just buffing each other in a dinosaur circle jerk, you actually get a pretty sort of mean entourage that's Sure, you're not going to win, but you're going to have a lot of fun, and I speak from personal experience. I mean, if you do win, that just makes it even better. Now, we've already talked about the Astrolith Bearer, so now we'll talk about the 3 different kinds of Sauraus units. So, Sauraus have all battle line, and they're divided into Sauraus Warriors, Sauraus Knights, and Sauraus Guard. So, to keep it brief, the Sauraus Warriors are very basic. Their only real thing that's worth noting is that you add 1 to the attacks characteristic of units with Celestite Clubs or Celestite Spears, while this unit has 15 or more models. You don't want that. Pretty much, well, sorry. Allow me to rephrase. Sauraus Warriors are only good if you field them in minimum squads of 10 with Celestite Clubs, which are 1 inch reach, 4s and 3s, -1 rend. That's why you want them with the clubs. They're okay in terms of their other stuff. You know, their banners and stuff are nothing to write home about. Their jaws are, which give them a second attack, are 5s and 4s. 1 attack. They are a 1 inch infantry, and they're on a 32. They're on a 32 mil base. So their base is a little too wide. Mine are all done with spears, and I regret this heavily, because I intended to run them as a 30-man blob. Which is the other way you should run them. Unfortunately, you have to make a choice between, do you run them as a 30-man blob, or do you run them as 3 10-man units? This is what I recommend, running it as one of these 2. As the 3 separate individual units, they are better with the Coalesced. This is because the Coalesced don't have to worry about them. They're all getting an extra attack. They're taking -1 damage. Their bravery is negligible on such a small unit. You can use them to just block multiple things and sit on objectives and block the backfield. They become a blocking unit, essentially. Not particularly great on attack. Good viability in terms of blocking. If you field them in a large 30-man blob, you are banking on using a lot of command points. You are trying to build a Death Star. It will undoubtedly fail you, but hopefully it serves as a massive screen for your army, since you can strangle. You can basically spread that 30-man unit out. And you can take them up to a 40-man unit, which is just as good. You get a thing. If you're going to run them with that, clubs are still recommended, but, you know, spears are just fine. Spears are fine. You're just gonna miss that rend. But Sauraus Warriors, because they're so bad at hitting, obviously you can see now where the Sauraus Old Bloods and the Commanders come in. Buff them up, buff them up, buff them up. Lots of command points spend to actually make them viable. Sauraus Knights are essentially 2-wound Sauraus Warriors that have way more attacks. These are good fielded in large units and are good for just piling in attacks, tearing apart light sort of units. The Sauraus Guard are expensive. They have 2 wounds. They hit better. Then that's pretty much it. Don't really bring large units of Sauraus Guard. 10-man units are just about the best. There's various kinds of skinks. Now, Skink Star Priest is a good, cheap wizard. I recommend taking one simply because of its spell. They have a potential to get you extra command points. And their Serpent Staff, again, has more synergy with the rest of your army for supporting skink units and those Sauraus units. Skink Oracle is an okay monster caster. It's not particularly good in melee combat, but as far as skinks go, it's pretty decent. The Skink Priest. Now, let's take a moment to talk about the Skink Priest. We talked earlier about a single relic that if you didn't have the wizard keyword when you put it on them, sorry, it was a command trait, that they got the Herald of the Old Ones, which they could use without spending a command point. And you'll see why this is important in a minute. Herald of the Old Ones. You can use its command ability in your hero phase. If you do so, you pick one friendly skink unit wholly within 18 inches of a friendly model with this command ability until the next hero phase. Add 1 to hit rolls for that unit. A unit can only benefit from this command ability They can't benefit from more than once. So, let's look at things that have skinks, because this might surprise you. Skinks themselves, with their bolt spitters. 16-inch ranges, cool. They hit on 5s and 5s. But, it doesn't say shooting attacks. So, that's all your skink stuff. Salamander units, with their impressive stream of fire. They have the skink keyword, so they can be hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s, -2 damage. -2 rend D3 damage, 4 attacks per salamander. Chameleon skinks can be hitting on 2s. Razordons have the skink keyword. Bastillodons have the skink keyword. Stegodons have the skink keyword. Pterodons and Ripidactyls have the skink keyword. Now, that just affects them all. And that makes your Stegodons go nuts. Absolutely terrifyingly powerful you can get with the Razordons and the Salamander and the Stegodon and the Bastillodon. And what this lends you to is, funnily enough, an army with bad shooting, that's not really a shooting army, becoming really good at shooting. And, in a pinch with its monsters, really good at just hitting with big Triceratopses. Now, you might ask, what should you put that on? Because the Skink Priest is very meh. It's not a particularly good unit to have. Its Starstone staff gives it a decent ability, but it's particularly squishy and not very good at fighting, even though it does have a meh sort of shooting attack. Well, you can't put it on a Star Priest, and you can't put it on a Starseer, and you can't put it on an Oracle, because all those are mages. They're all wizards. So, that means that they are all going to get the first benefit, which is where they get to add 1 to their casting, which is not what we want. We want the second effect, where if they're not wizards, they get that command ability, and they can do it for free. The key thing here is that we get to do that command ability for free. So, none of them are a viable option. So what do we then put that ability on so that we can use it? Because remember, skinks here are the core of your army. Skinks are just flat out the better units in this army. The Razordons are fantastic. Salamanders are good anti-armor. Chameleon skinks are okay. Skinks, you can field them in lots of numbers. They're very fast, great objective takers and skirmishers, good for blocking, good for just about everything. Bastillodons are just about unkillable with ridiculous armor save that you can use them for blocking, and they serve as artillery pieces with high power. You have the Pterodons, which move so ridiculously fast and are able to just unload guys with attacks from a distance and just skirmish the shit out of things and just fly all over the place. It really turns things into a case of the skinks do the killing, the Sauraus take the pounding. And let's not forget the Ripidactyls and the Stegodons, which will serve as shock troops. The Ripidactyls serve as really good flying shock cavalry with a lot of attacks, really good in Coalesced, and just about mandatory in Starborn. I mean, you don't get as much effect out of them in Starborn, so the Pterodons are the better choice, but you don't have a lot of great hitting power in Starborn to begin with. The Stegodon, at the same time, serves once again, just like the Bastillodon, as a monster that serves as both artillery piece, but instead of blocker, this time it serves as massive battering ram. And with this ability placed on it, with this command ability, all of its... Now, let me say it again. All of its melee weapons go to a 2+ to hit. And then they're all 3s to wound. They all have -1 rend, and they all have good damage. And this thing can take a massive beating in terms of it can have a good 3-up save depending on what you're fighting. It's got 10 wounds. You can take that to 12 wounds. You can heal them. Well, here's what we put it on. Here are the things that we can get that on. Well, there's the Stegodon, which has an option to put a skink chief on it. That's what we want. That's your first primary choice. The next choice, if you want something to be more mobile and put that on multiple skink units, so you can just fly around zippity-zoo, put that on whatever you need it to go on, and being a general pain in the ass that's really hard to catch, the Pterodon Chief, who, on top of that, has -1 to hit him, is a good option as well. They're very good options. Then we can take, on top of that, you can give them the relic, the Feather Cloak. With the Pterodon Chief, you can potentially make him -2 to hit, make him even faster, and then he has this command ability where he's flying around just giving all your skinks whatever they need. Sure, he might not have a lot of wounds, but your opponent has to catch him first. It's like playing Eldar on jet bikes, if you're familiar with 40k. The Engine of the Gods is a third decent choice. It is a hero, so it is eligible, so you can make it your general. And, you know what? It's decent. It's pretty decent. It provides a nice little pool of stuff, and it'll typically be at the center of any force you're fielding, typically buffing other Stegodons and monsters. Now, I'm not going to talk too much longer, as this video has already gone way over time. We will talk very briefly about the Croxagores, and then the Stegodons a little bit more. The Croxagores are a good unit that pair well with the Skinks. And, as I said, Skink units do the heavy lifting in this army. They do the objective capturing, they do the shooting, they do the damage. They do most of your hard work. The Sauraus serve to take the hits for this army and block and just die to ensure that you have enough time to unleash that. The Slann serve to provide the buffs and the magic that you need to keep your army going and to keep it working at max efficiency. Your monsters all then have a separate role that is then hybridized. The Croxagore are a monstrous infantry unit with 4 wounds, a 4-up save that hit as you would expect for a monstrous unit, with 4 attacks, 4s and 3s, -1, 2 damage, and they have their jaws, but while they're not skink, so they don't benefit from pretty much anything, and while they're not Sauraus, so they don't benefit from anything there, while they're working with the skinks and within 6 inches of a skink unit, which remember, there's a lot of things with the skink keyword as we just went through, they get +1 to hit. This can turn a unit of 6 of them into quite the bulldozer and can do a lot of work. So they're a nice thing to have at the center of your army, along with all these other things. If you had to put a gun to my head and say choose between a block of 30 Sauraus as the core of the army or a block of 6 of these, I'd say I'll take a block of 6 Croxagores. Everything else can be skinks, and those 3 Sauraus that you're making me take can be 10-man units for blocking and backline holding. And then, of course, I'd like as many Pterodon and Rhipidactyls as I'm allowed, please. The final thing we're going to talk about is the Stegodons. I'll be honest, this book is just Stegodons the book. When Games Workshop marketed this book, they put all their emphasis on Stegodons, which made me really worried when I read those previews, like, why are they showing anything else? And then, when I got the book, it occurred to me, you literally didn't do much. I mean, you made some good quality of life changes, because Seraphon, you literally had to win by cheesing it in the most ridiculous ways possible. Otherwise, you would just lose. And there was no multiple ways to play the old Seraphon. Now there's multiple ways to play them. But clearly you want to sell Stegodons, Games Workshop. And as someone getting into Seraphon, I have to recommend buy the Stegodons. They're that auto-include unit, unfortunately. All your monsters are good. The Stegodon just beats the cake. With all the skink buffs, with the skink's ability, with Thunder Lizard, which serves to improve what I've been talking about with the skink synergies even more. I just don't have time to discuss it in this video. The Skink Chief on Stegodon being a character, you can make your general, the ability to take Stegodon's battle line. Pretty cheap battle line at that. The command ability to pick one friendly skink unit wholly within 24 inches of a Stegodon hero, and add one to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons to that skink unit. So use that to target another Stegodon, and all of a sudden we have a lot more attacks. A lot more attacks. Man. We go up to 4 grinding jaw attacks. We go up to, let's see, at maximum crushing stomps, 6 crushing stomps. We have our massive horns going up to 3 attacks, dealing 5 damage apiece. All of these are at -1 Ren, guys. These Stegodons are ludicrous, especially when you combine them. The one thing I will say is that they do have 2 weapon options, the normal Stegodons, and that is the Skystreak Bow and the Sunfire Throwers. I recommend the Skystreak Bow. It's too good to pass up. Now, the Sunfire Throwers, awesome. You get to spout fire everywhere, you get to hit everything around you, turning each one of these things into quite the line breaker. But the Sunfire Thrower's 24-inch range, it's 3 attacks, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, -1, 3 damage. It's really reliable shooting once you account for everything else. The Engine of the Gods is not what it used to be, so I'm not going to really talk about that too much. But, suffice to say, it kind of got neutered in terms of its table, but most of the time you just want the one that will be healing your guys or spitting mortal wounds at your opponent. And it also has extra wounds. So, that is it. Now, that is all the time I have. I've already gone 30 minutes overtime, and if you're still watching, I sincerely thank you. I get too excited and too overboard when I talk about Seraphon. So, I hope this has been useful to you getting into Seraphon. I had to re-record this video at least 12 times because I was very salty about this book. I love it. I'm still very salty that Seraphon did get the short end of the stick. Where are the, the mount traits? Where are the good relics? Where are the command traits for my generals? Why does everything feel so skink-centric? Anyway, I've been Jay from Jade Productions. I hope that this video has been useful to you, given its length. If for those of you who are curious about Seraphon and wanting more information on them, I don't have time here to discuss everything. I'd probably be going for 2 hours if I did. So, if you have any questions, pop into the Discord in the links below, or leave a comment below, and I will happily talk about the Seraphon with you if you require further information. So, I've been Jay from Jade Productions. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.